Wouldn't believe how many times I went through this. Okay, so we're going to look at the first textbook we have for you, which is Compelling American Conversations. Ideally, any advanced speaker of English would complete Standout 5 first, okay? We know some of our students who have been here a long time have not used Standout 5. It may be worth looking at Standout 5 if you have an advanced ESL. And that would be anybody who scored, and you may not know this, anybody who scored 12 on the speaking test or 13 or 1 or 2 in the reading test. Again, you may not know what your students scored, that's fine. Your coordinator does. Above that level, we would suggest books that we didn't talk about at the conference, the 10 steps books. And there is a video on the Tutor Hub about that because I presented on it a couple months ago. So I decided that it didn't make sense to present again on that, but it made more sense to present on these 2 books, which I think you will find of use. These are supplementary books that we might give you alongside Standout. The first one we're going to talk about would be a supplement if your student, oh, we're not sharing, are we? Thank you. Fortunately, I haven't said anything important about what's on the screen, so. This is why I have a tech person. Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina. Did you make it out? Yeah. I'm good. Okay. So you might be given this in addition to Standout, or you might be given this alongside the second book we're going to talk about, which is a vocabulary book. The vocabulary book might also be given to you for another, for some other reason. Your student wants to go on to college and you're working on some other textbook and they need the vocabulary as well. So the Compelling American Conversations book really is what it says it is. It is about creating compelling conversations about life in the United States. Okay.
Sorry, I accidentally advanced you.
I don't care.
Okay.
They might care. I'm still talking, so what do I care? Okay, it features topical questions to encourage conversations. It gives you vocabulary and idioms to help build fluency. There are some really basic writing assignments, such as writing questions and statements. There are always quotations and proverbs about the topic. There's an activity that I'm recommending you do, have the student do at home. All of this is in the packet that I gave you, so you don't have to write all this down. Plus, it will be appearing magically online at some point, and then you'll be able to look at my presentation again if you really are bored with your life. Don't do that. Okay. So the search and share is a really nice piece that's a 1-page. Do a little research on your own, come back to class and talk about it, okay? And the research that it asks them to do is stuff that they are probably talking about or may be going to talk about. For instance, one of them is tell us about your hometown. Go online, do a little research about your hometown and come back and tell us about your hometown, right? Well, that's something that you might have a conversation about, right? So there's a wide variety of those. And then there are really short independent activity ideas as well. So it's not a reading textbook. And we want to be encouraging all our students who are tested on the reading test to have a reading test as their first book, okay? And that is because reading is so fundamental to our society. And because we have to give them this test so that we can get paid by the government for having them as a student, right? So it's not a fun test. I hate giving it. It is what it is. We do what we do, right? Okay, so This is what the search and share looks like. There's a copy in the packet that I sent you, that I gave you. And this is the one on watching the news. It's for the very first lesson. And what it asks them to do is to find a video online of someone telling the news in their native language. And then watch another video of an American telling the news. And watch for body language, which could be a really interesting thing to look at. One of the things that I know that you may also know, Americans tend to move their mouths a lot when they speak. Vietnamese tend to do this when they speak. I don't know how anybody understands them. I can't figure out what they're saying. You know, it's different cultures do different things with their mouths, right? But we also, some of us talk with our hands, some don't talk with their hands, right? So this just asks them to look and then to come back the next time and report back. What did they find out? You can see there's not a lot of stuff to read. There's not a lot of space to write. And there are about 5 or 6 questions at the end. This is a pretty simple one. They do get a little bit more complex. So along with this book is a fabulous teacher's guide that is, we have some paper copies, but it's available online, okay? I want to really encourage you, if you're using this textbook, to use the teacher's guide, because there's so much more in the teacher's guide. The list of phrasal verbs in the teacher's guide is almost endless. There are activities for minimal pairs in the teacher's guide. Unfortunately, it doesn't do a good job of explaining how to use those activities, but I've created a one-pager for you that the lesson plans will link you to, okay? So let's see what, okay. So in the teacher's guide, there's an explanation of each section of the textbook. There are additional idioms and phrasal verbs. There's additional information on the topic, sorry, that you may know, that you may not know, that you may want to share, that you may have no interest in sharing, but it's nice to see what somebody else might do with the topic. This was written, I think, by a group of people. Eric Roth was the main writer. He wrote several iterations of this book. And they were classroom teachers. Together, they sort of put together these ideas. One of the things about this book is it's kind of intended for groups, right? And I know most of our tutors don't have groups. So we have to figure out a way to adapt them, right? I tried to be clear about how to do that in the lesson plans, okay? So for instance, when you have a list of questions, first you would read a question, you'd have your student read the question. Partly you want them to try to replicate what they're hearing in the way that you pronounce everything in that sentence, right? And then maybe you'd stop and you talk about it if it's a question you're interested in, right? What is your hometown? Well, I'm from Pittsburgh. Where are you from? I'm from Nagasaki. You know, so that's one little back and forth, right? And then you do the next question. Okay, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, and I don't have questions here, I'm sorry. Another way to do it would be to read through the list of questions out loud to your student and say, which ones do you want to talk about? We're going to have a conversation. I'll ask you some questions, then you ask me some questions, okay? The goal is not to be talking. You don't want to be talking the whole time. You want to get them to be talking, right? And you want them to ask questions as well as to answer questions. Okay, so there's lots of information in the textbook. Okay, the pronunciation exercises, they're calling them always minimal pairs. There's expansion activities, prefixes and suffixes. English, as you know, doesn't work the same way as all the other languages, right? So we need to be really explicit about what a prefix is and what it does and what it means and how it changes, you know, all of that. We need to do that, right? Sometimes we forget about them. I know I do. And then there's also some explanation behind the search and share, or maybe some additional information, so that I highly recommend the teacher's guide. So the lesson plans that I've created break each lesson into 2 days of about 90 minutes each day. Partly because I'm thinking the vocabulary book will take another 30 minutes. So that would give you a 2-hour block. If you aren't going to meet for that long, you're going to want to adjust the routine somehow, okay? But I don't think you want to try to squeeze a whole lesson into one day. I just think that's too much stuff, okay? The lesson plan suggests independent practice work. It follows the model Pennsylvania suggests of I do, we do, you do, which you were taught at training. It includes the standards required by the state, which you can just ignore. Okay, they're at the bottom. They're not bold. And it also includes reminders for casual conversation. Because you're working with non-native English speakers, you want them to talk. Encourage that, right? Okay. So this is what the lesson plan looks like. You've probably seen several others like this earlier today. Up at the top, we've got basic lesson information, the chapter, the pages. I am going to change these to be the title of the lesson, but didn't happen yet. I hope you understand these are living documents. As you discover mistakes, report them, we'll fix them, and then they'll be better, right? Then we've got lesson goals. This is something to talk about with your students. The lesson goals are in the teacher's guide. They'll say, for this lesson, these are the things the students are going to be doing. You can read them to the student and say, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to share memories using past tense and conditionals. You don't have to know what conditionals is, okay? You don't have to, it's okay. I sometimes forget. We're going to do some research, read and review and cite articles from online sources, or they're going to do that at home. And we're going to pull the vocabulary from articles and use it in writing and speaking, okay? These are the vocabulary words that you're going to specifically teach in the first day of your lesson, okay? For this particular lesson, which is lesson 6. We're going to use past tense and conditionals, tells you the pages, what to do before you meet, and then it's got during the lesson. The routine gives you approximate amount of time for each piece of this lesson, okay? As with all of this, there's no need to hurry, right? If you discover a topic that your student really loves and you want to spend more time on it, that's fine. Even though I printed this today, okay, in the back of the packet that I gave you is the routine, day 1 routine, day 2 routine. Each day starts with a getting started, the lesson introduction and goals, a warm-up activity, presenting new learning, which is generally maybe a little bit of directions at the top of the page for that chapter. It is also when you would be asking the questions or reading the questions the first time. Then the guided learning, learner activity, and a conclusion. We recommend at the end of a lesson, ask your students what they do, what they know now that they didn't know before, or what did we talk about today, or what are you going to remember for next time, right? Something that sort of lets them know this lesson isn't isolated from the rest of their life, right? We want them to carry it over to the next time. We do want to encourage extra practice outside our meetings. There is extra practice listed in the lesson plan. For compelling American conversations, I made 2 different things. I think one day it's something like try to listen for conversations around this topic when you're out and about, or try to use some of these words when you're out and about. The other day, it's the search and share, right? If they can't do these things at home, and there's a way to do it together, the search and share you could certainly do together, right? That's going to extend the amount of time it takes. The practice speaking is very hard, as we all know. If your students are isolated within their own language island, they may not be speaking much other than with you, right? Try to encourage them to do some listening. That's accessible to almost everybody on their phone, right? Even if they can't do speaking, at least they'd be listening. If they have kids, children's shows are actually kind of fun to watch as an adult. They're not all of them, granted, but there are some that are not so bad, right? And it's still a way to start listening for English language at a level that they understand. Okay, day 2 is essentially very similar to day 1, except that you're finishing up the chapter. It has 2 pretty distinct sections. Each starts with a list of questions. And so that's part of why I separated that way. Okay, let's see. Often in the teacher's guide are words, idioms, phrasal verbs that aren't included in the student book at all, okay? And those idioms really enlarge the vocabulary, right? It will even talk about idioms with the word make. What's the difference between using make and do in idioms, right? I think it's make and do, but I can't remember. Oh, good. I'm remembering correctly. Or one chapter talks about sports. There's like 2 pages of idioms on sports. Who knew that sports were such a big deal in English, you know? So that all of that can enhance what you're doing with them. Okay, so day 2. Okay, so that's compelling American conversations. As I said, that's about maybe 90 minutes of what you're going to do. And the reason I'm saying this is I have people using these 2 books together. And this is how I recommend that they do it, right? The other 30 minutes you're going to be spending just on vocabulary. And wait till you see this vocabulary book. They're waiting with bated breath. I can tell. Okay, so we're talking right now about the lowest level. There are 3 of them, but the lowest level is the one that we finished to date. It has 5 units of 4 lessons. Each lesson has 5 academic vocabulary words. Not a huge number of words, right? The structure is identical in each lesson, and I think it's identical across the 3 books. The goal is to use these same 5 words correctly over 4 days of meeting with you. So it's not a lot of time each time, right? We're using them over and over again so that their use becomes automatic and they can cross disciplines with it, okay? The exercises include examples, fill in the blank exercises, and writing exercises. It also demonstrates word families. We'll talk about them, I think, in a little bit. The teacher's guide gives additional examples for the tutor, okay? For meanings of words, examples of the words in use. It has an answer key. It has unit review tests, which are not included in the student book. In the student book, there are reviews. They're 1-pagers. The unit test might be something that you want to give them as well. It's available online only. So let's take a look at a lesson plan. Oh, we'll talk about a lesson plan. It breaks each lesson into 4 days of approximately 30 minutes a day. It suggests independent practice work. I think I'm repeating myself. Follows a model suggested by Pennsylvania of I do, we do, you do, and it includes the standards required by the state. It follows that same pattern. There's basic lesson information at the top. Everything else, lesson goals to talk about. I guess we've organized that slightly differently. Interesting. And then what to do during the lesson. this is the lesson routine. The first day you meet, you will be doing a very specific format. This is very prescriptive teaching that you're doing with this book. It asks the students to, and I don't think I have a copy of the first page of a book, so I can't give it to you. They're asked to look at each word and rate them. Brief is one of the words in the first lesson. How well do you know that? Can you use that? Can you explain it to somebody else? Okay, so they're asked to really think clearly about how well they know it. And then the next page, you're going to talk about sentences. You're going to give them definitions if they need them. They're going to come up with sentences, and you're going to do that for each of the 5 words. And then there's a fill in the blank for the first day. So this is the warm-up activity. Day 1 is this vocabulary review, vocabulary knowledge rating chart. Day 2, it's to reread exercise 1, which they're doing day 1, 5 sentences. Day 3, the warm-up is to reread exercise 3, again, 5 sentences. Day 4 is to reread answers to exercise 4, okay? So it's, the warm-up is exactly what they've done the last time with you. And then there's always some other things to do that day. Let's see. Again, we want them to reflect on how they did, what they learned at the end of the day. And you would only do that one time, right? You probably would not stop in the middle and say, do you know your vocabulary words now? You'd wait till the end of the session and you'd say, what do you remember? What did we talk about today? You know, and maybe they'll remember the vocabulary. Oh, I rated these 5 words that I've never seen before. 5 words I know so well, I don't know why we're doing them. You know, could go either way. Or they could say, well, we talked about getting to know each other, right? It doesn't matter. You want them to, this is part of how we remember things, is by rehearsing it. Okay, so in the packet I gave you is, make sure I'm right. Because I put this together this morning, and I might not have included it. My a combined routine. Ooh, it's really out of. I apologize. This packet is a mess. That's not quite how I put it together last night, or whenever I put it together. Oh my goodness. Okay. I can get a copy of this to you. This is a combined routine for using these 2 books together. Okay. So the getting started, the small talk is only included once, right? But you're going to review. She's laughing at.
I'm not laughing.
Yes, you are.
I'm smiling with you.
Okay. So lesson introduction and goals can go over both things that you're talking about that day. The warm-up activity is going to be repeated a second time here when you move to the second book. I suggest starting with the vocabulary first. I think it's fairly quick. And it's not as interesting, right? So let's get it done and out of the way. And I've still included all of the same pieces that were in the individual routines. It should add up to about 2 hours. I did not do the math again, so it might not, because, you know, math. Yeah, okay. So both these texts have completed lesson plans on the lesson plan site that you were shown. You'll be getting the links and explanation for all of that in the next tutor newsletter, and probably also in an email after this conference. We'll be adding the rest of the featured text by the end of April. I want to know what you think, if you think this will help you.